So it's been a big week. Parliament voted on 3 Brexit motions, and we put out 8 videos in 5 days. So now all the votes are over, let's have a quick recap of what happened before we focus specifically on yesterday night's vote. On Tuesday, Parliament was faced with Teresa May's so-called meaningful vote. She brought back her proposed deal to the House of Commons for a second time. Having made minor changes, she was hoping that the deal might pass this second time round. However, MPs weren't satisfied and the deal was rejected 391 to 242. Although it failed less spectacularly than the first time round, it still represents the third biggest defeat for a government in parliamentary history. But don't jump to conclusions and assume that the deal is dead. May's not given up on it just yet, and we'll be discussing that later in the video. So after rejecting May's deal, Wednesday saw MPs voting on a no-deal Brexit. We covered this in huge details yesterday, but let me give you just the quickest of recaps. Originally, MPs were supposed to be voting on whether or not they supported the UK leaving without a deal on the 29th of March, the current deadline for negotiations. However, this motion ended up being amended, with the Spellman Amendment changing the timeframe from the 29th of March to under any circumstances. So May tried to convince MPs to reject the motion in order to keep the option of a no-deal Brexit on the table. The reason for this is explained in the video we put out yesterday. But what matters most is that her attempt failed, and MPs voted through the motion 321 to 278. That brings us to last night. MPs have rejected May's vote, and they've also rejected the idea of leaving under no deal, rejecting it under all circumstances. As Corbyn said yesterday, this puts MPs in a difficult spot.
The Prime Minister said the choice was between her deal and no deal. In the last 24 hours, Parliament has decisively rejected both her deal and no deal. While an extension of Article 50 is now inevitable, the responsibility of that extension lies solely and squarely at the Prime Minister's door.
So today MPs were asked whether or not they supported extending the Article 50 deadline beyond the 29th of March. The Speaker allowed 4 amendments to be brought to the House. 2 cross-party amendments, one from the Labour leadership, and another from Labour MP Chris Bryant. So let's run through those amendments, what they mean, the results, and their impact on the final vote.
Order! Order! Under the order of the House of today, I must now put the questions necessary to dispose of proceedings on the motion. I begin by calling the Honourable Member for Totnes, Dr Sarah Wollaston, to move Amendment H. Formally. Thank you. Question is that Amendment H be made. As many as are that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby!
The first amendment to be voted on requested a delay of Brexit in order to hold a second referendum. This amendment wasn't supported by either Labour or the Conservatives. Labour abstained, arguing that this wasn't the right time for it, and the Conservatives whipped against it.
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 85, and the noes to the left, 334.
This meant that the amendment was defeated 332 votes to 85, a massive majority of 249. Those who support a second referendum argue that this huge defeat doesn't mean that there isn't political will for a people's vote. Labour's official policy supports a second referendum, so they're on board, they just thought the timing was wrong. However, undoubtedly this was still a big blow for the People's Vote campaign, as it looks like even if Labour whipped for a second referendum, it would still struggle to get a majority in Parliament. After all the votes, MP Dr Julian Lewis suggested that the whole idea of a second referendum may actually now be dead in the water.
Oh, very well, Dr Lewis. Spit it out quickly, man.
Rather puzzled by the leader of the opposition saying something about a people's vote. Is there any way within the rules of order one can register the fact that as more than half the House of Commons voted against a second referendum tonight, the fact that so many of them abstained has nothing to do with it and the matter is completely dead?
Well, the right honourable gentleman has registered his view with his usual force and we are grateful to him. I don't think he's interested in a response from me, and he'll be pleased to know that he's not getting such. No further to that point of order.
The Second Amendment, known as the Benn Amendment, sought to give Parliament control of the parliamentary schedule. Controlling the schedule is usually a right reserved to the government. Therefore, removing this would reduce May's role to a sort of intermediary between the Commons and the EU, and the move is without any constitutional precedent.
Order! Order!
The ayes 311, the noes 314.
Thank you.
Frankly, it's amazing it came so close, and it was only because 6 Labour MPs decided to vote against it that it didn't pass. It's a constitutional convention that the government sets the parliamentary timetable, and it's been that way for centuries. And this amendment would set a new constitutional precedent. Brexit really is pushing Parliament to its limits. The Third Amendment, tabled by Labour and Corbyn, asked the government to set aside time for indicative votes, so that Parliament could express majority support for something other than May's deal. So Labour argue that now is better late than never. We should take some time to hold votes and gauge what people would actually support.
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 302, and the noes to the left, 318.
The final amendment, the Bryant Amendment, was an attempt to stop May from bringing her deal back for a third time. The amendment asked the House to observe that Erskine May, an authoritative guide to parliamentary procedure, prohibits multiple votes on a motion that is of the same substance as a previous motion that has already been voted on.
Order! We now come to Amendment J in the name of the Honourable Gentleman Member for Rhondda.
I don't think there's any need to move this to a vote, is there?
Thank you.
The amendment was never actually tabled, and as such, it doesn't prevent May from bringing her deal back again. Something she's now able and planning to do. Something we'll also talk about in a moment. So in short, all of the amendments failed. This meant that the main vote was on the government's original motion, which said that Parliament wants an extension, and notes that unless a deal is agreed soon, this will probably have to be a longer extension.
Order! The question is the main motion in the name of the government. Division! Clear the lobby!
So MPs voted on the original, unamended motion, and then the results came in.
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 412. The noes to the left, 202.
The main motion passed by 412 votes to 202, a massive majority. Unlike the previous days, May didn't address the House after the vote. Instead, Jeremy Corbyn was the first to react.
Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, after the last few days of government chaos and some defeats, all of us now have the opportunity and the responsibility to work together to find a solution to the crisis facing this country, where the government has so dramatically failed to do so. We've begun to hold meetings with members across the House to find a consensus and a compromise that meets the needs of this country. But the last few days have also put a responsibility on the Prime Minister. First, to publicly accept that both her deal and no deal are simply no longer viable options. And secondly, to bring forward the necessary legislation to amend the exit date of the 29th of March. And I also reiterate our support for a public vote, not as political point scoring, but as a realistic option to break the deadlock. Our job is to try to meet the concerns of the people who sent us here in the first place.
This is in many ways the first win of the week for May. 118 members of her own Conservative Party did vote against her, but the motion did still pass, and May is now able to begin work on bringing her deal back to the House. So why does May want to bring her deal back up for vote again, when it was so resoundingly and humiliatingly rejected before? Well, the motion MPs agreed to today acknowledged that if a deal was reached, then only a short extension would be needed, while without a deal, the extension would need to be longer in order to leave time for a new deal, second referendum, or general election. She will need to ask for that extension at the next EU summit on Thursday 21st. That's because it's the last summit before the deadline for Brexit on the 29th of March. Therefore, May wants one last shot at her deal before the summit, likely to take place on Tuesday 19th. She's hoping that the deal will have a better shot with Brexiteer MPs because of this whole complicated situation. If they approve her vote, sure, it might not be the ideal Brexit for them, but it does mean that there'll only be a short technical extension before the UK leaves the EU. If they reject the deal, then the UK will have to ask for a longer extension to give them more time to come up with a new deal. This longer extension also brings the idea of a second referendum or a general election before Brexit into play, both things which could halt Brexit altogether. So while it might not be the ideal form of hard Brexit for them, it might be better than no Brexit at all. In time, we'll see how it plays out and if May is ever able to get her deal through. We'll continue to report on this as it progresses, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a thing. We'll also be sharing exclusive content and articles on our social accounts, where you can find us by searching for TLDR News.